Future Now Show. Brought to you by the Club of Amsterdam.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Future Now Show. Today, we're joined by Rob Tercek, Futurist speaker, author, and co-host of the Futurist podcast. Hey, Rob, thanks for joining us today.
Hi, how you doing, Katie?
I'm doing well. Finally get to have you on my show, and so happy to have you as a guest.
Likewise, it's good to see you here. I'm happy to drop in and visit with you. How's life treating you these days?
Oh, yeah, doing great, doing great. Just here in North Carolina, and
Hi.
yep, all good, So let's dig into the Futurist podcast, right?
Yeah,
What
sure.
inspired you to get into the Futurists?
Well, Brett King's my co-host, and we've been having a conversation for years about the term futurists, because he's known as a futurist. People call me that sometimes, and I have sort of an ambivalent relationship with that word because candidly, there's a lot of bad futurists. There's a lot of people who call themselves futurists, and they don't really have a methodology. They don't seem to have any kind of sound practice around it. It's just a label. Someone called them entertainment futurists, which is a fair way to describe it. So I was never quite sure if I wanted to wear that term. But increasingly people refer to me that way because I think about it and I write about the future a lot. And so I said to Brett, let's try to reclaim that word. Let's see if we can't restore some substance to it. And in our definition, a futurist is somebody who is actively designing and building the vision, their vision of the future. So it's a little bit different than someone who sits there and makes a prediction or a forecast or, the old joke, somebody with a crystal ball. That's not really the way we see a futurist. We think the future is something that you can build and you can take an active role and you can influence the trajectory of how the future is going to unfold. So the people that we interview are usually people who are quite active in a field. Sometimes they're science fiction writers and sometimes they're pundits because they have an influence as well. But we interview people like a NASA mission controller, or someone who is working on robotics, someone who's designing robots, someone who's designing automated systems, robot vehicles. We had a transhumanist candidate for president. So these are people who are taking their ideas and applying them, and they're trying to shape the world into the world that they envision. And to me, that's a super exciting thing. It's also very empowering for the audience. And one thing we've gotten from the audience, they love to hear about methodology. So they're super interested in how does a futurist look and think at the world? Like what is their perspective? And then what do they actually do to bring those ideas to fruition?
Right, yeah. So, and what is, in your opinion, what are the biggest topics you hear repetitively the most on the Futurists? Because there's got to be at least a few.
There are. So there's a few that keep coming. Obviously, these days it's all artificial intelligence, and I don't think that's an exaggeration. I think it's that profound. The new generative AI that's been introduced is so generally applicable or so broadly applicable to so many different fields that it makes sense. It's turning up in healthcare, it's turning up in pharmaceutical design. It's obviously having a big impact on media or potentially a big impact on the future of media. But people are stretching language models now even to robotics, to managing autonomous systems and so on. So it's such a broad technology. It turns up all the time. Some of the other topics that come up related to that are things like technological unemployment, the idea that people are going to lose their jobs. So far, there isn't much evidence to support that, but it keeps coming. It's sort of like a persistent fear, I think, that people have. And then the following topic, of course, is one that I'm really skeptical about, and Brett's really positive about, which is a guaranteed income, a minimum income. So I just don't see how we would actually do it. Like I've never heard of a rational plan for how you would launch such a thing.
Right.
But other people are they view it as inevitable because robots are going to, in their view, take all the jobs. I think that's a simplistic view. So I think the story is going to be way more complicated. It's going to take a long time for that to unfold. So watch this space. That's what's fun about the future is there's more of it every day.
Yeah, that's for sure. It's funny, speaking of AI and unemployment, there's been a lot of talk about Hollywood and,
Yeah.
people fighting back against all the use of AI gens and everything. What are your
Yeah.
thoughts about how Hollywood's being impacted by this right now? Being that your
Well,
background is in the media.
yeah, thanks for that. Yeah, I've spent 30 years working in the media business. It's a topic I'm interested in. I live right in Hollywood. The Hollywood sign is right there. Like you can't see it, but it's right there. Trust me. And And right there, down there is Netflix's headquarters. And so, for months now, every time I drive by there, there's a bunch of protesters on the street. Let's say specifically picketers. So people
Wow.
who are walking the picket line, striking. It started with the Writers Guild, and then the directors went on strike, and they settled pretty quickly. The writers stayed on strike, and then the Screen Actors Guild joined them. Now the writers' strike has been resolved, but the actors are still striking. And central to the issue for all three of those different guilds is the use of artificial intelligence. There were many other issues that involve compensation and some of the work practices and so forth. But the one sticking point right now for the screen actors is artificial intelligence. And in specific, what the studios are asking for is the ability to scan an actor and reuse that actor without paying a royalty or residual payment. Obviously, you can see why that's a problem for an actor. It's like, well, I get paid once, and you can use that personality you've created, that synthetic personality, a version of me, forever without paying me any kind of residual. And I should back up and say the principle of residuals was one that was hard fought, and it took years and years and years for for this to become an established norm. Because in the old days it was just like an actor on a stage. You did your job, you got paid for that day's work, and you were gone. But the notion of electronic media is such that you can repeat the thing and play it again and again, and the studios get paid each time the film or the TV show airs. And so the actors said, well, that's a performance. Each time it's played, it's a performance. We should get paid again. It took a long time to establish that, but they did succeed. And so they got residual payments. Now that's quite normal. In the last 50 years, that's been quite normal. The debate is just what is the percentage? How much are you going to pay those actors and writers and directors every time that film is played?
Right.
But the studios want to bring an end to that now. They want to sort of create synthetic actors. Very contentious issue. So zooming out a little bit, I think you can say, I talked a minute ago about people worried about technological unemployment or displacement from a robot. The movie studio crisis that's happening this year, the strikes that are happening with the actors and the writers, those are good illustrations of the fear. Those groups are fearful of the future where they're going to be displaced by AI. They're not wrong to be concerned about it. I'm not diminishing. I understand. I'm sympathetic to them. I do think they're trying to fight the future, though, because I see this as inevitable. It seems to me within a matter of years, you're going to have synthetic actors who are every bit as good as humans. That's not true today. So I think it's important to say, like right now, today, no one's losing their job to artificial intelligence yet in the entertainment industry. But it does seem like it's right around the corner. It could start with voice actors. One of the interesting things that's happened, the strike that's happening is only between the motion picture studios and the screen actors. There's a lot of other industries that use talent, advertising and commercials and so forth. They have different rules. And during the strike, Spotify, which has been making a big play in the podcasting business, Spotify introduced something that was quite interesting, and it was without a lot of fanfare. They introduced the idea that you could take a podcaster's voice and turn that voice into kind of a generative AI that would generate speech in other languages so that you could do simultaneous translation of that podcast in multiple languages. Now, on the one hand, that's incredibly powerful, right? So a person, let's say, who does a podcast in English, suddenly they can do that podcast in Bulgarian or Mandarin and reach those audiences. And that gives that one person unprecedented reach without much extra effort. On the other hand, it's a little weird because you go, well, wait, you're taking my voice. I'm not recording this live, and you're doing something with it. You're turning it into like a voice sample, if you will. And now you're generating new content. Well, what's to stop Spotify from generating brand new content in English with that person? Of course, nothing. And so that's a really scary idea. And that really neatly summarizes the fear that's wrapped up in AI, in the sense that it's empowering on the one hand and deeply disempowering on the other hand. And everyone's worried about, where will that end up? What will happen to me? So that's a pretty widespread fear. But Katie, this is all coming in the context of three big trends in the motion picture and media business. And the three big trends are multi-decade trends. And so there's this immediate concern around artificial intelligence. But these three other trends, I think, are actually way bigger, and they help pull all this stuff into perspective, and they give us the ability to forecast a little bit about what might happen here in the media business. Do you want to hear about those three trends?
Oh yeah, let's do it.
Okay, sure thing. So the trend one is these are going to be very familiar to people, digitization. So the shift from analog media to digital media. When we were little kids, media was all analog. You bought a vinyl record, you watched a television show, or you listened to radio. Those were analog sine waves passing through the radio frequency spectrum. Um, and then they were able to record that. So you had cassette recordings and videotape recordings. But then in the 90s, we started to digitize. We shifted towards digitization. And that went through several stages. So it wasn't like one simple transformation. I'd argue it's still continuing. It's still evolving. But each phase of it caused a little bit of turmoil. So the first thing was the shift from videotape to CDs and to DVDs, so digital discs, if you will.
Mhm.
But the very next thing that happened was that you could rip the file off the digital disc, which meant that we could do away with physical media altogether. And then that created the Napster crisis, where people were downloading content without permission.
I
And
remember
suddenly,
those days.
yeah, I mean, the record labels discovered that their customers had kind of gotten out of control and could distribute the content themselves and consume the content without paying for it. And that created a problem. The problem really there was that the whole industry was hooked on an old model, which is that they didn't really sell the content, they sold the container. And all the pricing was based on the container, which was the disc or the tape. And that was a great business model. But as soon as you could liberate the content from the container, suddenly that business model fell apart. And the music industry did everything they possibly could to force their customers to conform to the old business model when the customers had already moved on to downloading and digital platforms. And we're thinking of all sorts of new use cases. All the innovation was happening on the customer side, and the industry was trying their very best to stop them. And so, in a weird way, the record industry went after their customers. People forget this now, but back in the early 2000s, the music industry was suing their customers. They sued 30,000 people for copyright infringement, and they used this absurd calculus of $150,000 of damage for each MP3 file. $150,000 of damage. Like, how could you justify it? And so they bankrupted many families. I mean, this was incredibly cruel. These are the big record labels. And so this is kind of an example like how not to handle digital media transformation. Through that painful process, what emerged, Apple emerged as a hero in the sense that they could wrap those MP3s in DRM, digital rights management, and bind them to a device and track usage. Now that gave Apple control over distribution. And the story shifted very quickly from that to streaming. And so then once you liberated the content from the physical format, then you could liberate it from downloading it at all to any kind of like recording or drive and simply stream it out to people. So today where we are is we subscribe to everything and we don't own anything. And so you have
Right.
everything, but you don't own anything. You don't have people with like, a wall of DVDs or CDs. You don't have people who have like a hard drive full of MP3s. It's like ancient history at this point. Where it's going next is towards generated content. So this is where generative AI is so freaky, because you might
Mhm.
not need actors, but you also might not need a movie studio. And I know this sounds like science fiction, but this is why we love talking about the future so much. I would guess that by the end of the decade, by 2030, you'll be able to generate a song with a singer or a virtual band, or you'll be able to generate a show with actors, and it'll be hyper personalized to you, to your preferences. And if you like it, you can share it with your friends. But what you're not going to have to do there is deal with a broadcast company like a TV company or a motion picture studio or an actors guild. This is a fundamental challenge to the business and the economics of this town. It's not here yet. It might never happen, but that's something that I would hypothesize about in about 10 years' time. That's trend one. That's the trend towards digitization. So as you can see, it's not quite done yet. We've gone through several phases. The second
Mhm.
phase that comes along with that, the second big trend, I should say, is decentralization. So mass media was highly centralized. And if you think about like what was life like before mass media, before radio and television, it was super decentralized. Every neighborhood had their own theater. Every neighborhood had local musicians that would play. Every restaurant had a band that played, right? So there was actually like a business for individual people to perform for each other. And a lot of people had skills. In 1910, most households, middle class households, had pianos. People knew how to make their own music. We just lost that skill over time because we become mediated. We've become used to watching someone else perform. That's the impact of broadcast media on the household. We lost those skills. But with the advent of digital media and digital distribution, it's become very easy for people to post their own content. And so you can see through things like YouTube and now more increasingly TikTok, people are generating their own content and they're quite good, right? There's some remarkably talented people out there who are not in Hollywood. They're not professionals. They're not in the guild. They're just people with a ton of talent who can make their own stuff. And what's extraordinary, particularly about YouTube, is that a single individual can get 40 million followers. Like that's like what a broadcast network used to achieve. Now an individual can achieve that. So that's really an incredible shift. But the economics there are very difficult because it's like being on a treadmill. Being an influencer or a content creator on a social platform like YouTube or TikTok, you have to create fresh content every single day. That is a difficult task. It's like being a live performer. But this has emerged as a thing. People can do it. Some people make millions of dollars doing it. So you can be very successful. There is a super long tail. And in the long tail, those people don't make much money at all. The complaint you'll often hear from artists, recording artists, is Spotify doesn't pay. You know, they're making pennies, even though thousands of people are listening to their music, they're not making much money from it. So the economics here are quite difficult. But yet I see a different trend at the same time. And again, AI plays a role here. What's coming next is with generative AI, anybody can create content. You don't really need to have that kind of talent. You don't have to be a great guitar player or a great looking actor or actress. You don't have to have an awesome voice. You don't have to be a great screenwriter. The generative AI is coming along, and already you can make mediocre content with those systems. Now people laugh and they'll say, well, that's not as good as a professional. That's true. It's not. A good professional in any field is going to outperform AI today. But how long do you think that'll be the case? We're talking about systems that didn't even exist 2 years ago. So in 2 years, will they be better? Of course. And how about in 2030? They're going to be much better. So I don't think it's going to be too long before these systems can outperform humans. And where it gets really crazy is when you can put them together so that I can use generative music and generative voice with generative actors and generative film. And all of a sudden I can start to compose my own media. I think you're going to see a new kind of creator or a new kind of creative talent emerge. But this will be hyper personalized, as I said. It'll be broadly distributed and decentralized. So that's another big trend. That's decentralization, second trend. The third big trend, and this is the one that's the scariest of all if you're in Hollywood, is that all media is data. Right. So the big gripe right now is that the artificial intelligence systems, the large language models, have been trained on publicly available data. And sometimes that publicly available data is copyrighted. So there's a big debate right now about whether that's even legal or permissible. You know, can you train an artificial intelligence on copyrighted content that's publicly available? We're going to find out. The courts will rule on it. There's a number of cases proceeding through the court. But setting that issue aside, because the courts will determine, we'll figure out what that means in the future. The fact is, right now, what AI consumes or what AI devours is media, and media is data, right? And so as all media is data, this is problematic because the media companies, the motion picture companies, the record companies, they don't consider themselves data. They consider themselves works of art. They represent huge bodies of works of art, the cumulative output of tons of talented people. And so for them, it's very conceptually difficult to think of themselves downgraded to just data, right? It sounds like they're just a bunch of ones and zeros, but that's a consequence of digitization.
It is.
And actually, arguably, you could say all data is a byproduct of humanity, right? Data doesn't just happen. It's not like some natural resource that's, you know, it's like a spring, like water that's flowing out of the earth or something. Data is generated by humans. Data is an artifact of humanity. In some respects, it's a representative of humanity. And in many cases, it's the greatest achievements of humanity. We're talking about the greatest aesthetic work produced by humanity, but it's all being kind of downgraded to this one level, which is just data, right? And the machine is indifferent to the quality, the aesthetics, and so on. It's just devouring and consuming all this data. It doesn't stop with media and entertainment. That trend is going to kind of pervade everything. So the third big trend then is that everything is becoming digital media, and therefore everything is becoming data. And by that, I mean the real world. So right now, the big new thing that I'm focused on in my career is digitizing the real world, building high fidelity digital twins of real world places, facilities, things like airports, cities, roadways, harbors. These can be measured now highly accurately through photogrammetry, using drones, using LiDAR and other technologies. And you can create a high fidelity digital representation of a real world place. Guess what? You're turning that place into data. You're literally digitizing the real world. And the AI is going to follow right behind and devour all that information. And so you're starting to see digitization leads us into this thing where we're datafying everything in the world. And then that data is going to get absorbed by artificial intelligence systems. So those three trends are reshaping the media business entirely. They're changing the economics. And unfortunately for the Hollywood motion picture companies, it means that the big tech companies that lead that process are going to be in a dominant role. And you already see that when you turn on the television. You know, today, Apple and Amazon provide very good streaming services, and they compete fiercely with entertainment companies on their own turf. It turns out tech companies are quite good at producing entertainment. But that's just a tiny example, but it shows you that it just isn't that hard to displace these media companies. So what used to be these gigantic entertainment media empires, today they're becoming a tiny subset of a data-defined universe.
Right. I mean, makes you think that we're so used to now, having to subscribe to all these Hollywood platforms, so to speak, even just the networks, right? You have HBO, well, actually, whatever it's called now. I think that the name has
Max.
changed.
Yeah.
Yep, it's
Yeah, they
Max
ruined
now.
it. They ruined it. It's too bad.
It's
One of the
so
greatest
weird.
brands.
Yeah. And then there's Apple and all of that. So
Yeah.
maybe the tables would turn, in the near future, where instead of people making, a couple bucks going in to be an extra on a set, or even being an actor in a Hollywood film, maybe the studios will have to subscribe to the actors in order to use their likeness for upcoming projects.
Well, see, that's the issue at the Screen Actors Guild have right now. They don't want to subscribe to them. They want a one-time
Mhm.
flat buyout, and then they own your digital likeness forever. That's really problematic, right? Because you could see, just based on what I just said, sometime in the next 7 years, it's going to be possible to use that data to generate a very good simulation of that person. I
Mhm.
mean, you're already seeing examples of that today, right? Martin Scorsese used that technology to down age Robert De Niro a couple of years ago. So it's not like novel even. Everything I'm saying, I know it sounds like science fiction, but it's actually in widespread use right now. These technologies have been
Yes.
around. They're getting cheaper. They're getting easier to use. They're getting more abundant. They're accessible to more people. So we're going to see them used more and more. And little by little, you'll start to see this becomes the dominant way to produce things. So the problem, I think, is that the motion picture companies don't really determine their fate. Their fate's being determined for them. And it's not a great outcome.
Right.
Bad news for Hollywood, long run. I mean, like all the things that we stand for in this town, I'm not quite sure where we're going to be in 7 years, but it doesn't look very bright.
Well, I mean, there is a lot of things happening, particularly people trying to fight back, whether it's Scarlett Johansson having lawyers, fight
Yeah.
back against her likeness being used to promote various products, or, now in the news, there's, what was it, Nightshade, a new tool that's poisoning data sets so that
Yeah.
if your likeness is being used, you can do something about it. So I think we'll see more of these things coming up in the near future.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, that's sort of a natural outcome, right? If someone's using your content without permission, you're going to take steps to do something to protect it. That seems normal. But bear in mind, that's tit for tat, right? That's totally reactive. That's not like it's not like Scarlett Johansson has some future strategy for how she's going to manage her brand in digital. Her attorneys are just reacting to somebody else, and they'll react and react and react, but that's not really a very proactive approach. There's no proactive strategy there, unfortunately. um, on the Futurists, we interviewed Imogen Heap, who's an interesting artist, and you remember she's taking
That's
the
right.
opposite approach, because she's like, hey, bring it on. I want to meet my AI avatar. I want to get to know her. I want to hear what kind of music she'll make. Like, she was totally into it. That's a different approach, and I think that's actually the more positive approach. What I've been trying to do is get folks to focus on AI as a creative medium and embrace it. Since, as you can hear from my comments, all roads seem to lead to generative AI right now, and that's particularly true in media and entertainment. So if you're in those fields in media or entertainment, I think you really need to embrace this. That's asking a lot, because as I mentioned, a lot of people feel defensive. People are fearful. It's hard to get people to think imaginatively or creatively when they're feeling fearful. This coming weekend on Friday and Saturday, I'm gathering a group of people in Santa Fe, which is a super creative city. And we're gonna do a workshop. We're gonna spend 2 days doing a series of exercises to envision how generative AI and real-time 3D can be used to build resilient communities, to reinforce the communities that we live in, including creative communities. I'm doing that specifically because I just don't want to live in a place of fear. I think fear is a lousy place to be. I think fear paralyzes you. It certainly kills the imagination. And we can imagine all sorts of terrible scenarios, but that's all we seem to be able to do when we're stuck in fear. And I want to get past that and say, okay, let's imagine this as a potential superpower. Let's imagine AI as something that can confer great powers on individuals. How will we use those powers? And how will we use them for good? So that's what I'm working on this weekend. It's called Creative Experience Santa Fe. And I'm very excited about it. I've been working on this for several months. We have a great group of speakers and facilitators and seminar guides and so forth. It's a highly participatory, fully immersive 2 day event. And we have everything from Aztec dancers to comedians. We have an immersive performance. There'll be a dome show that you can visit, demos of immersive media and so forth. The idea there is to get people out of that fear mode and get them curious and engaged with the technologies.
Wow, that sounds actually really cool. I would love to go there. Where is it? How do we get tickets? How do we
Well,
find
so
out more?
it's called CXSF or Creative Experience Santa Fe. And if you go to the website creativestartups.org, that's the organization that's hosting it. And that's where they're selling tickets. There are still, I think, 5 tickets available as of this moment. Who knows if they'll be available tomorrow? It's limited by design, and what we wanted to do was have a critical mass of people in each of the workshops, but no more. Because when you do a workshop, it's hard to do a workshop with more than 25 people. That's actually quite a lot if you're running a workshop. If you're doing a conference or a seminar, you can have 5,000 people, no problem. Actually, the more the better sometimes, depending on the event. But if you want to get the word intimate is the wrong word because it sounds sexy. I don't mean that. What I mean is uh, if you want to have kind of like a close connection with the people you're working with, where you're on a kind of a friendly rapport level, you need to break it down into small groups, ideally around 15. And that's what we're aiming for. Anyway, so that's happening this weekend, and I'm thrilled. We'll be doing it again in the future. Already, people have asked me if I can organize them in other places around the country. And so we'll see if we can do
Right.
that. Yeah,
Maybe
it'll be
even do a live stream.
we're not streaming any of it. It's in fact, we're staying off of as much, we're trying to stay off digital media as much as we possibly can because
Ah,
media gets in the middle of things, right? We want this to be people to people. There'll be a couple of things where we have to go hands-on with generative AI, to show how it works or something. But mainly we want it to be discussions and workshops that are like person to person. We even have mentor walks where we're going to go outside the venue and walk and talk about goals and ideas and so forth. So think of it more as an attempt to restore the human connection, and less about like going through media to something. So for that reason, we said we're not streaming it. We're just not going to do it. I don't even know if they're recording it. They may not even record it. Make it evanescent, a moment in time. Unlike everything else right now, we're not going to record it forever.
right. I mean, there's so much more value in that, especially these days, you know, um, just having something where you bring together a group of people and just make it in that moment. So, all right, that's really great. And Rob, where can we find out more about you, what you do, your website, your socials, and the Futurists?
Sure thing. So the Futurists is the podcast. That's thefuturist.com. Futurists with an S at the end, thefuturists.com. It's on every podcasting platform, but if you can't find it there, you can definitely find it at the website, which is simply thefuturists.com. My personal website is roberttercek.com, and that's where you can find out stuff I'm working on and thinking about and writing. I also have a Substack that's going well. I'm writing right now about copyright and generative AI because copyright are kind of the rules of the past, and they're coming into conflict with generative AI, which just doesn't respect the containers of the past at all. So it's a super interesting topic. My Substack is called the Owner's Guide to the Future, and you can find it at tercek.substack.com. And I'd be thrilled if your audience checked out any of those things. And if you like it, let me know.
Will do. Absolutely. All right, Rob. Well, thank you again for coming on the show, and we're gonna have to have you on back next time so you could share more. And
That'd be great.
until then, we're gonna have to steal one from the Futurists.
That's-
We'll see you
In the
in
future.
the future.
I love that. All right, Katie, great
Right?
to see you. Thanks.
Thanks.